Most gun owners are easily able to tell you the 4 rules of safe gun handling. Unfortunately, what we often see is not every gun owner is able to translate those into effective, actual safe gun handling. So, here's a couple of things we see quite often on the range, and some things you can do about it so that you don't have these problems. One thing I do want to note, for most of these things, if you see me doing something stupid or unsafe, I'm not actually using a gun for that. This is a CERT training tool, and it's actually just a laser designator. So if you see me pointing this at things, sweeping myself, doing bad things with trigger fingers, I'm using this. Some of the things we're doing here, I'll use a real gun because this doesn't have a slide that works and so on. But in general, if I'm doing something stupid, it's not a real gun. First things first. When you control the gun, when you take it out of the holster, when you pick it up or anything, put it in a shooting grip every single time. The gun is designed to be held in a certain way. Put it in your primary hand and keep it there. Don't switch hands so you can reload in a strange fashion. Don't move it differently so you can grab it differently to holster and so on. When you grab the gun in the first place, put it in a shooting grip. Keep it that way because you'll maintain best control over the gun. The more you switch hands and do strange things, the more you twist and turn it, the more likely you are to do something that is unsafe. Keep it in your shooting grip all the time. Second thing, keep your finger off the trigger. It's quite simple, and yet most people don't do it. They grab the gun in their shooting grip, and immediately their hand goes here. They're waving it around, they're talking to people, they might be loading in the first place with their finger on the trigger. Don't do that. When you take the hand and put it on the gun in your shooting grip, your finger should be onto either the frame or the slide of the gun, actually pinned there flatly against it. Okay? Not merely off the trigger, not outside the trigger guard, but curled like this is, not on the trigger guard on the outside, but above it, completely away from it, and not hanging out there in air, but actually flat against the frame. Because under conditions of surprise or something like that, or you trip or you're startled, your hand is going to clench. You're already gripping the gun, which means your finger is going to do this. If it is anywhere where it can slide into the trigger guard, it will. If it's up on the frame, or even better, up on the slide, if you clench, nothing's going to happen. If it's out here and you clench, you're going to light one off. If it's on the trigger guard and you clench, you're going to light one off. It's not acceptable to do that. Keep your finger pinned to the frame or the slide of the firearm unless you are on target, actively ready to fire. This is true no matter what else you're doing. If you're drawing, the finger is outside of the trigger guard, pinned to the frame. If you're loading or reloading, finger stays off the trigger the entire time. If you're moving, finger stays off the trigger the entire time unless you're shooting on the move, whereupon you're on target and then the finger moves into the trigger guard. When you're done shooting, the last thing that happens is your finger comes out of the trigger guard, pins itself to the frame, and only then do you relax and do other things. If your sights are not on target and you are not prepared to shoot, your finger should not be inside the trigger guard. It should be pinned somewhere else safely. Now, many people remember those things and go, oh, I can do that. But often the problem is when we ask them to do multiple things at once, we have people who are running and they're moving and they're fine. We ask them suddenly to reload and move, and they forget about what the trigger finger should be doing. Or we have someone who's shooting and it's working out really well, and in the middle of it they reload, and somewhere in the reload there's a problem. And so they're used to reloading and getting the finger on the trigger, but now they have to perform some sort of remedial action, and they do it with their finger on the trigger. Stop. Build a habit that the finger is always outside the trigger guard, pinned to the frame or the slide, no matter what you're doing, unless you are actually on target. If you're not on target, it's not in the trigger guard. Keep it that way. Third thing, don't sweep yourself, or anyone else for that matter. Sweeping is what happens when the muzzle crosses a portion of your body or someone else's. We don't like that. Unless we were planning on shooting that person or ourselves for some strange reason, we shouldn't do it. Common ways that people do this. If your holster is so bad that you need to hold it in place with your other hand to draw, you need to get a new holster and belt. Because every time you do that, note this is the CERT pistol, every time you do that, you are flagging yourself, you're sweeping yourself, and someday you're going to put a hole in yourself. People reach out to do something and then they bring this across their own arm. Again, you must be paying attention to where the muzzle is going. And so when we talk about sweeping, what we're really talking about is muzzle control. Know where your muzzle is pointed. Have muzzle awareness. Where is it pointed at any given point in time? If this is the safe direction, then it doesn't matter if I'm moving one way or another. The gun stays in that safe direction. If there isn't a safe direction, the gun better be down. Whether it's down this way, it's down this way, it's down this way, don't care. But it better stay in that downward direction. But it can't be down too close because then I'll step into it. If the only safe direction is that way, then the gun stays pointed this way. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to this group of people, if I'm talking to this group of people, if I'm moving one way, if I'm moving the other way, none of that matters. I need to know where my muzzle is pointing. It is my responsibility to do that. If it's pointing at anything dangerous or unsafe, that is my responsibility and I need to fix that. Know where your muzzle is pointing. Occasionally, I see people who do this sort of thing and they're turning around corners and things like this. In a competition, if you do that sort of thing, chances are at some point in time you're going to break the 180 line. You'll be pointing in an unsafe direction. Last time I had to call someone on that sort of thing, they looked at me and said, well, that's the way I've been trained. And my response is, well, I've been trained to know where my muzzle's pointing and to control that. If you have a gun, it's your responsibility. Have some muzzle awareness. Control that muzzle direction. Don't sweep anything. Keep the gun pointed in a safe direction at all times. The last thing I want to talk about here is safe gun habits. Safety is something that needs to be made a habit. Not an unthinking habit, a conscious, deliberate habit. You always do it right, every time. You build in yourself the tendency to always, no matter what, behave in a safe fashion. For example, one easy demonstration of this is if someone hands you a gun or you receive a gun from someone else, what's the first thing you do? What I do and what I teach everyone else to do is the first thing I do is I check the condition of that particular firearm. If they tell me it's loaded when they hand it to me, all I need to do is a quick press check, pop that out, and take a look. If they tell me it's empty, I should be able to do this and it'll lock back, whereupon I can see exactly what's going on. If I have the gun and I know I've just loaded it, obviously I don't need to check its condition after that. I can holster it up and carry it around. As long as it stays either in my hand or under my direct control, I don't bother checking its condition again. But the minute I set it down for some reason, when I pick it back up, the first thing I do is I check its condition so that I know exactly what its state is. That's incredibly important. I practice with my guns. I do dry fire, I do live fire. Sometimes I use real magazines, sometimes I use practice magazines. At any given time, a certain gun that is lying in front of me might be in one of a number of conditions. Now, probably I know exactly what that condition is, but I am not stupid enough to think I'm infallible. And so if I pick up a gun, whether I've left it there for 30 seconds or I've picked it up after a night of having it being on the shelf, either way, it doesn't matter. I check its condition. That way I know for absolute certain exactly what condition the gun is in and what it's going to do if I have to pull the trigger. If I'm going to go dry fire, I better check it and make sure I know what I'm doing. If I'm done with dry firing and I expect the gun to be live, I better check it to know what I'm doing. If I have set it down and it has been out of my sight at all, I don't know what's happened to it. Chances are of my wife coming back down and messing with it, pretty much zero. Chances of me possibly doing something and forgetting, now that's pretty possible. Likely, not so much, but I don't care. I can't afford to make a single mistake, which means every time I pick up a gun or receive a gun from someone else, I check its condition first, every single time. I don't care if I put it down and pick it up 3 seconds later. It's not like checking its condition is a difficult thing for me to do or takes up a whole bunch of my time. I can do it very easily. I can do it while getting ready to do something else, because I can pay attention to this while I set up something else. It doesn't matter. I can check the condition and it's not a big deal. Shooting something that I don't mean to shoot, or worse yet, in a situation where I need to shoot something and not being able to, that's a big deal. And so we want to instill habits of doing things right every single time. You don't go, oh, this once I know what it's like. No, you don't. That's when you shoot something you don't mean to. Be safe every time. When you pick up the gun, keep in the shooting grip every time. Keep your finger outside of the trigger guard. Don't sit there, flip the gun around, think it's all cool, hand it to someone else like this, hook your finger through the frame or something like that. Wow, that gave me chills just doing that. Don't do that. Keep your finger out of there. Keep it pinned to the frame at all times, no matter what else you're doing to the thing. Whether you're locking it back, whether you're putting in a new magazine, doesn't matter. The finger stays pinned to the frame. Safety is a habit. Make it a habit by doing the same thing every time. If you don't know the condition of the gun when you pick it up, you don't know what's going to happen when you pull the trigger, which means you probably shouldn't be pulling the trigger. And since you probably pick it up planning on pulling the trigger, you should probably check. That's a convoluted way of saying if you don't check the condition of the gun when you pick it up, you're not being safe. Safety is a habit. Do it right every time.